Number 3. I was looking for a car to buy for my son on his 18th birthday. I searched all of the standard automobile websites, including cars.com and eBay Motors. All of them were pricey, as one would expect. Craigslist was the only place to find a real deal. About a week into my hunt, I discovered a 03 Toyota Camry. It had 67,000 miles, no accidents, no damage, and was in good shape for $3,500. They felt like a bargain for such a dependable vehicle with such low miles. The seller resided around 10 miles away, which was an acceptable distance when looking for a car. I called him to schedule a time to come look at it. The man sounded normal on the phone, assuring me that there were no difficulties with the car. He introduced himself as Bob. I brought $3,500 in cash, even though I intended to negotiate the price as much as possible. I arrived at Bob's property approximately 15 minutes early via the dirt route. It was a tiny little house with a decent-sized property, but it was rather far from the nearest neighbors. The garage was open, so I walked over to see if anyone was inside, but it was vacant save for a large number of vehicle components. The automobile was not in sight. There was only one car on the property, an ancient pickup truck. I went over to the front door and checked the house numbers. It was the correct address. The doorbell button was missing, so I knocked on the front door. After exactly 5 minutes of knocking, I decided to phone the man. So I dialed his number, and I heard a cell phone ringing inside the house. I was quite perplexed at this point. Now I knew I had found the right house. I couldn't understand why, if he was home, he wasn't responding. I decided I had to peep through one of the windows to see who was inside. Peering through the glass, I couldn't see anything because it was dark inside the house. I observed an old-fashioned dining room set, but across from it, I noticed someone standing at the back door of the house, peering out. I assumed it must have been Bob, so I pounded on the window, but he didn't move. Because this was not a rural location, there was no gate or anything to separate the backyard from the rest of the property. I simply strolled around the house and into the backyard. I didn't understand why he couldn't hear me. When I came to the back door, I realized something shocking. The figure standing there was a taxidermied human being. I ran back the way I had come and returned to my car. I looked up one last time before driving away. The blinds on the window I had glanced into had been closed, but I could see 2 of them bent open. Someone was observing me from that window. You can probably assume that I had the gas pedal on the floor the entire trip home. The entire situation still makes no sense. All of the car pieces, the fact that there was no Toyota Camry, and the taxidermied human figure. The fact that there was no car there leads me to conclude that whatever that man was had no intention of selling me anything. And it also raises the disconcerting possibility that I was on the verge of becoming a lifeless statue staring out that man's back door. Number 2. I wanted to get the iPhone 12 approximately a year ago. I discovered a guy on Craigslist who was selling his for $200. He said it was in great shape and he wants to upgrade to the 14. I didn't know much about how to test a phone to ensure everything worked, so I took along my younger brother, who knew a lot more than me. We met midway in a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot at around 10 p.m. 2 huge scary men stepped out of a black Honda Civic and approached us. One of the guys brought out his phone and showed it to me. It had no scratches on it. My brother removed my SIM card and inserted it into this new phone. He ran some tests and informed me that it worked. The individual then requested $250, up from his first request of $200. I lied and told him I only brought $200, and he appeared upset about it. I had $250, but I didn't want to pay more than his original asking amount. I figured it was his way of making sure I didn't argue over the price. I handed the guy the $200, and he and his friend returned to their car. We arrived back in my car, and I tried out the new phone by calling my girlfriend. I sat for approximately 5 minutes, testing things out. My brother observed that the two guys hadn't left yet, but I didn't care. I started my car and drove out of the parking lot. My brother then mentioned that the two guys started their automobile exactly like I had. I didn't find it too strange. I went down the turnpike and came to a stop at a red light. That's when I noticed a black Honda Civic approaching us in my rearview mirror. That surprised me because I assumed they were coming from the opposite direction. I continued driving home, but they followed us around every turn, closing up on my rear. My brother advised I pull over, but I wasn't going to do that. I knew they were seeking for mischief. It got to the point where I was attempting to avoid them and began driving recklessly. If they needed help, they would yell or blast their horn, but they were looking for trouble. I took a risk to lose them. At an intersection, the light had just gone red. I floored it across the junction before any of the cars could pass. My brother yelled at me, calling me foolish and insane, but it worked. They didn't follow. We arrived home after a long travel. My heart was still beating due to the gravity of the situation. I was just glad I got a working phone at such a reasonable rate. Later that night, I was fiddling around with my phone, attempting to set up some things before going to bed. My parents and brother were already asleep by this moment, and right then, the sound of two automobile doors slamming shut outside interrupted me. I peered out my window and my heart stopped. A black Honda Civic was parked across the street. I could only presume that the two men were already halfway to our front door. I immediately woke up my father and explained everything as quickly as possible. He stood up, grabbed a baseball bat, and hid behind the front door. A loud knock sounded from the front door. My dad screamed for them to leave. One of the people on the other side of the door claimed to have a gun and threatened to fire the lock off if he didn't unlock the door. My father urged me to contact Joe, a buddy who lives 2 doors down and is a police officer. I contacted Joe, and he said he'd be right over, but to stay hidden. Here's the bit that still terrifies me today. There was the sound of a suppressed handgun shot. I looked over and saw a gunshot hole in the door, inches from my father's head. My father bolted from the door, and we all listened. We heard Joe outside shouting for them to down their firearms. My father walked outside to assist as they lowered their weapons. Joe arrested the 2 men. I have to say that this was the scariest day of my life, but it was also the nicest feeling I had ever experienced. Number 1. I am a 22-year-old girl. I was shopping on Craigslist for a couch for my new apartment a month ago. I found something that appeared like a nice value. Based on the photos, the couch appeared to be in excellent condition. The seller preferred to be contacted via email. His email address was mexicanpoppy666@hotmail.com. I thought the email was a little off-putting, but I went ahead and wrote the man my offer. He responded within 5 minutes, accepting the offer and requesting my address. I was honestly uncomfortable with his question. I didn't want a stranger to come to my house. I recommended that I pick it up at his house, but he insisted on coming to mine. I eventually stopped responding, and a day later, he emailed me again with his address. I wasn't sure if I should go at that point, but it sounded like a great deal, almost too good to be true, and his address indicated that he didn't live too far away. So I got into my van and headed to the seller's residence. I instantly noted that the house was slightly smaller than the others on the block. When I rang the doorbell, a middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap answered it. He offered me a big smile and asked me inside. I immediately felt uneasy. He took me into his living room, where I spotted the couch. I immediately saw scuff marks and little tears in the couch. It was not at all in the shape depicted in the advertisement. I commented on this, and he simply grinned and offered to cut the price. I told him I wasn't interested, and then things got strange. As I was leaving the house, he placed his hand on my shoulder and offered to give it to me for free if I agreed to give something to him. I let out a disgusted guess and returned to my car. I didn't look up out the window. I just drove away quickly. But it doesn't stop there. That following night, I was lying in bed watching TV when I thought I heard someone stomping up the steps to my porch. I muted the television and could clearly hear someone tampering with my front doorknob. I sprang out of bed and tiptoed to the front door to check through the peephole, but whoever it was had already left. And then I thought I heard the gate to the backyard open and close. That was when I picked up the phone and dialed 911. Soon later, I heard someone tampering with the doorknob of the back door of the flat. I hollered to whoever it was that the cops were on their way, and then I heard the gate open and close again. They were gone. This was a month ago, and nothing has changed, but I still can't sleep at night. I'm 99% positive that was the man selling the couch. He must have followed me home. There's no way this was a coincidence. I'm not going to use Craigslist anymore, yet I'm still looking for a new place.